Hello, welcome everybody to tonight's Truth Proof live stream, and we're in for a good night. Welcome, Paul.
Welcome, Les. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we really are. This is our guest tonight. We'll not talk about him too much at the moment, but somebody I want to speak to for a long time. He gets referenced in a lot of podcasts. He gets referenced in a lot of the unexplained. So if anybody's not heard who we're going to be talking to, sit back and listen because he's an interesting guy. So yeah, we've had a good week, haven't we?
Yeah, but first of all, just do a little bit of housekeeping here. We've got to thank everybody, all the new subscribers that have come on since we reached the 10,000 subscriber mark. We're nearly at 11,000. So we've got to thank you all very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well appreciated, because it's to take us a long time to just to get to 10, and then it's just slipped over. So that's great. Appreciated, and thank you.
So welcome everybody into tonight's stream, and if we can see any names, we'll give a few mentions.
Well, yeah, I can see the 70 joined us already, which is great. We've got AMG Rider, I Talk Cryptids, good to see you, mate. Jojo, Al Durham, Andy Pollard, Ginge, Dragonborn. Always good to have your support, and Deb Shaw. So Al Durham, I've done Alan, and Andy Sheeham, Daz, Adam Sandor. But yeah, thanks, Adam, for your input last Sunday. It was appreciated. Tom Waters, Welsh Wend. Let's have a look. Stargazer, Rivington Pipe Beast. You know, we say every week Stargazer there. I know I'm probably repeating myself here because I've not said 83. Now it's going up as we say it, isn't it? Bridget Vanden Bosch, Mel Suter. Good to speak to you today, Mel. Disabled Welshman. And I'm going to have to stop because we want to move on.
Yeah, brilliant support. And if you've got any questions, please put those questions in caps, and we'll get them read out to Joshua or Paul. Without further ado, then I'll meld into the background, Paul, and we'll bring our guest on, Joshua.
Joshua, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Excited to be here.
Oh, not as much as me. It's brilliant to be talking to you, and obviously the name speaks for itself. Joshua Cutchin is who we're talking to tonight, people. Writer, researcher, author of a large collection of books, and the one that sticks out in my mind, Where the Footprints End. But we've also got UFOs Reframing the Debate and Thieves in the Night, and they're all the titles of them tell us what they're about, really. But welcome to Truth Proof, Joshua.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we jump into your writings and your research, and this is out of the box kind of, well, it's brilliant. It's brilliant out of the box research. I think it is anyway. Where did it begin? Let's wind right back and let's go there for a bit.
Well, it has a couple of starting points. I suppose the first was that I grew up in a house where we watched a lot of movies, and I was something of a monster kid. You know, some kids are into dinosaurs, and I was into dinosaurs too. Some are into construction vehicles, but I was definitely into monster films and creature features. So that probably is the earliest place to look. But I also grew up in a household that wasn't discouraging of any sort of curiosity in the paranormal. I would check out books or buy books or ask for books that dealt with things like ghosts and Bigfoot, and it was never discouraged. The attitude was, oh, well, at least he's reading. So I always had a bit of an interest in all this stuff. Bigfoot was my main thing. And then, years later, I ended up getting my first desk job as an adult, and it was an hour commute each way, an hour in, an hour back. And this would have been around 2012, which I still consider to be sort of the golden age of paranormal podcasting. There were enough to keep it interesting, but also few enough that you could actually listen to them all. Now there are so many good ones out there, I have a hard time keeping up. But that really rekindled an interest in all these things for me. And I will never forget, but one of my sisters-in-law bought me an Amazon gift card for my birthday or for Christmas or something like that. But I used it to buy a Bigfoot book, J. Robert Alley's Raincoast Sasquatch, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. But I remember very distinctly when he was discussing some of the Alaskan tribes and their Bigfoot analogs, how there was a belief that if you took food from the Bequas, their version of Bigfoot, you would be stuck with the Bequas forever. And I said, hang on a minute. That sounds quite a bit like Western European fairy folklore, and coastal Alaska is quite far away from Europe. So and so I sort of sat on that little fact for a while, and I was like, okay, well, Nick Redfern will write a book on this, or someone else will. And after a while, I got this sense of, oh, I guess maybe I should be the one doing that. So I took that step, which, you know, as you're aware, less so nowadays, but back then, you know, back in this would have been around 2014, you know, 10 years ago, there was even more of a stigma attached to putting your name on these things. So from then on out, it was like, well, I guess I'm going to continue to write about this stuff. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the similarities, what were some of the most striking similarities to European folklore and the things that you were looking at in Alaska and in other parts of America?
Oh my goodness. Well, I didn't realize at the time. So that revelation that I had became the sort of starting point for my first book, A Trojan Feast, which was looking at the ways that this food taboo, such as it is, manifests around the world. And it truly is a global idea that if you're in some sort of other world and you accept food from the residents there, you'll be trapped there forever. I find that really compelling that would be found everywhere on Earth, because it implies that there was a truly international civilization with cultural exchange that we don't apprehend, or there is something like the collective unconscious, or people are actually interacting with these things. And any of those three is a really...
Anybody, it's that transmigration of knowledge that we couldn't have had 100, 200 years ago, that the same belief system was there in lots of different cultures around the world.
It's so a lot of scholars thought that this idea sort of grew out of the Persephone myth, you know, where she was taken to the underworld and given a cursed pomegranate seed and had to stay there rather. And that makes sense for Eurasia, and I'll give you Africa too, but you find this also in the Americas and Oceania and Australia. So nothing conventional can explain that to my mind. But, you know, since then I have discovered, as you and I have been talking about, there are more similarities than I think people really apprehend that sort of unite these bodies of folklore on different continents. And there are even quite a few comparisons you can draw between Bigfoot and fairies of all things. And that's not a comparison that people make. So,
well, I don't know if you want to go there, but do you want to give us a few examples of that, Joshua?
Certainly. You know, Dr. Valet once called himself a heretic among heretics, and sometimes I feel like I'm a heretic among heretics because I have some pretty odd ideas, but some of these things have real shocking specificity. One of my favorite examples personally is this notion of the braiding of horses' manes. There is a subset of researchers in the United States, although you can find them abroad, who claim that large hairy hominids like Bigfoot steal into stables at night and braid horses' manes. I even found an account from a Russian researcher who claimed that he saw an Almasty, their version of Bigfoot, doing this. Now, you know, let's set aside for the moment whether or not that's an actual phenomenon. I think that a lot of it is poor horse management, right? You're not brushing out the horse's mane every night. But at the same time, it is fascinating that a braided horse's mane in America is blamed on Bigfoot, whereas a braided horse's mane in Ireland or Scotland would have been blamed on witches or fairies. You know, the idea was that, you know, they formed the little stirrups out of the horse's hair to ride on. You can still find that belief over here in the Americas and in parts of Canada like Nova Scotia. But anyway, so there are a lot of things that are just genuine anomalies that we sort of graft onto whatever our preferred boogeyman, wherever we happen to be, is. And it sort of becomes part of the mythos that surrounds that particular cryptid or spirit or what have you. You know, it's really interesting to me that a lot of the descriptions that you'll find of the brownie, the Scottish brownie, and some of their analogs, French goblins, I believe it's Germanic Picamderlin is another sort of race of fairy person, were always said to sort of have simian features. Now, they were very short. They weren't as tall as Bigfoot, but they were said to have simian features. And as luck would have it, there's a substantial subset of indigenous folklore here in North America that describes, these small, hairy people in the forest. Cryptozoologists now call it Littlefoot,
Yeah.
and they say, oh, it's a subspecies or it's a juvenile Sasquatch. But, it sounds strikingly similar to some of these contemporary fairy encounters that we get. And I will say that I have also collected, as bizarre as it might seem, Bigfoot shape shifting and size shifting. So that sort of casts an entire new light on these Littlefoot stories.
I was going to just touch on that, and the Fae and their suggested ability that they can present as many things, because I've spoke about it before and said, could the Fae be responsible for everything that we're dealing with? Where do you think what role do you think they play in this? And I know we're all surmising. None of us, I don't think, have a real handle on what we're talking about, but you've got more of a grip on it than a lot of people.
Well, I have to think with two minds. There are my preferences and my personal passions, and then there's also me being intellectually honest. So, my preference and personal passion is that it's all fairies. The whole UFO fairy discussion is another rabbit hole that we could go down, but like that is exceedingly clear to me once you start looking at that the modern UFO contact experience is modeled after a lot of these fairy experiences. The other side of me, the side that it tries to remain intellectually honest, has to admit that there's a little bit of a problem in the way that we use these terms. So there was a time when anything that we would have called paranormal or supernatural today, people would have just said, oh, that's fairy, or oh, that's of the fairies, or something along those lines. So there's a little bit of perceptive bias sort of built into that question. What I will say, and this is, again, a strong hunch that I have, it's not a hill that I'll die on, but I do have a strong hunch that there is some sort of intelligence, perhaps non-human, perhaps originating from us in another way, but there's some sort of intelligence that we have interacted with over the millennia across the world as human beings that is shockingly consistent. And I suspect that how it appears to us, how it manifests to us, is dependent upon cultural and societal conditions and expectations. I think that's probably the safest thing that I really feel genuinely comfortable saying.
Do you think then, in a similar vein, we shape the outcome of these encounters then? And our cultural beliefs and the way that we live, do you think that shapes it? Because different cultures see these things also as different entities, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, so this is another bit of probably a controversial statement, but I see a lot of parallels between all these experiences and altered states of consciousness. I'm not saying that encounters with UFOs or fairies always take place in that space, but there are a lot of comparisons that you can be drawn. Time anomalies in both supernatural encounters and altered states of consciousness, reports of buzzing sounds, to say nothing of Terrence McKenna's self-dribbling machine elves. But so to that extent, one of the things that psychonauts will advise is to go in with the proper set and setting, because that will dictate the nature of your experience, a good trip from a bad trip. And I think that perhaps something similar to that is going on. You hear these really confronting stories of negative or frightening experiences, and it's led to all sorts of speculation that these entities feed off of fear or something. But sometimes I wonder if it's not that it really feeds off fear, it's just the way that you've colored the experience with whatever baggage that you come in with. This isn't victim blaming, this isn't victim shaming. No. I would be afraid too, right? But I wonder if that might not sort of explain some of the discrepancies that we have, because alternately, between you take two different people and they'll have the worst experience of their life or a transcendental experience that they can't wait to get back to. And how do you reconcile those things? And
do you then think that in some instances it could be the same type of phenomena presenting in both scenarios, but it's just the person's mindset at the time that's dictating how that experience sort of pans out?
Well, I've been a big fan of the idea that something about these experiences is mediated by certain endogenous, internally generated factors in our own physiology. And the fact that we all carry within our bodies, probably our pineal gland, but within our bodies, the world's most potent psychoactive compound, dimethyltryptamine, DMT, I think probably speaks to something of like that going on. You know, and again, to be clear, I'm not saying that this is everything is an hallucination or a vision or people are deluding themselves. I think that legitimately is a gateway to another space.
You've just took the question I was going to say.
Yeah.
Do you think the DMT then is it's not an hallucination? Is that the way to access this other realm?
Yeah, I do have some suspicions about that. I mean, you know, DMT is closely related to melatonin, and its production is affected by light. What's the most common thing that we see across all these paranormal experiences? Light. You know, sometimes I wonder if the light isn't the pure native form of these phenomena, and then we bring all of our other baggage onto it once this sort of DMT process kicks in. But you know, so for all I know, it's the light behind things. You know, there's the reissue of Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia has some of the most striking cover art that I've ever seen. And it's a gray alien holding up several masks. I think one is a 50s space invader, and one is a devil, and one is a fairy queen. And the gray's got all these masks, right? And everybody's like, oh, that's a revelatory cover. And I agree. I love the concept. But the original art, if you can track it down, it was posted to the artist's social media a while back, but the original art, if you can track it down, goes one step further and reveals that the gray itself is a puppet on an arm that's you know, outside the frame of reference. And I love how that image encapsulates this offstage handler that seems to be going on with here, you know, and exactly what that is, I think, really does start to come down to one's personal suspicions and beliefs.
So, Josh, do you think it's possible that there are many different types of phenomena presenting, or could it just be one presenting as many things?
Well, again, I have to approach it with that sort of dichotomy, right? Like, I really love the idea of it being one phenomenon, rather, to be accurate. At the same time, I realize that there's a certain reductivism built into that stance, so I can't fully adopt that. You know, having said that, I am comfortable enough saying that these, if you were to do a Venn diagram of all these things, near-death experiences, shamanic initiation, altered states of consciousness, cryptid encounters, UFO encounters, fairy encounters, there's a lot of overlap on that Venn diagram. And I don't know what that points to. Does it point to it all being the same thing? Perhaps. Does it point to it all manifesting in the same way, you know, the mechanism by which it gets here? Maybe that's part of it too. I don't know. I mean, you know, even if you look at a lot of sort of cosmologies from around the world that talk about other spaces, other worlds, it's not necessarily just one other space. It could be multiple different spaces. So maybe that's something that's going on. But I do think that there is a connective thread that runs through all this, and the great challenge of our era as people interested in these topics, people who've experienced these topics, I should say too, not myself, but is to try to sort of pull on that thread and to see where it can lead us. And I think that's, you know, if I could be a bit critical of a lot of the discussion nowadays, it's that people aren't pulling on that thread. You know, you've got the cryptozoologist, the cryptid fans over here in the cryptozoological community, and the ghost people are over here, and the UFO people are over here, and everybody's in a glass house, but everybody's throwing rocks. No, you're crazy. We're the ones who've got it.
It's sad, really, isn't it? Because, like you've just said, you've got the ufologists, and you've got large organizations within ufology, and I know for a fact, because I've been told by some people within those organizations, that within a UFO report they'll get cryptid information and other types of information, but it's omitted. So it's not good for the research, is it, at all? You're not getting a true picture.
And then we turn around, you know, these respective communities turn around and they say, oh, we've been doing this for decades and we aren't really any closer to answers. And I'm like, it's because you're excluding data, you know?
Yeah, you've got to. So what do you think as a whole then all of us have got to do to sort of break through and advance, even if we never find the answers, just advance a little bit more? We've got to start thinking, as I said about you earlier, outside of the box, because that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, what I have a phrase that I used, I think, in my second book, which was The Brimstone Deceit, which was all about smells and the paranormal and trying to find something in common in all those experiences. I had a phrase that was something to the effect of the UFO community needs another book on Roswell, like a submarine needs a screen door.
Yeah.
We're just sort of going over the same old things, and it's funny that you asked that, because I had someone recently. I've yet to respond to her, so I'm being a bit negligent in that regard, but I plan on following up with this response. She asked me, I'm really into this stuff, I'm interested in it, but I don't know how to come up with an idea to add something new to the conversation. And my response that I'm going to compose to her is basically, read all the books you can on all these topics that you're interested in, and force yourself to go into some spaces that you're not really as interested in. I don't know what that might be, but let's say you're not into ghosts, read about ghosts too. Read all the stuff that you can get your hands on, stuff that you like, stuff that you don't like, stuff that you think is reputable, stuff that you think is disreputable, and then set it all aside and start reading about something completely different, and that's sort of how a lot of that's part of the way that my ideas come to me is, I'll be watching a video on YouTube about Indo-European horse sacrifice, and I'll see something in that little mini documentary that I'm like, oh, that has to do with UFOs, and there are these little things that will pique your interest if you just sort of broaden your interest into other areas and start looking where, again, nobody who's interested in this stuff really has looked.
No. So let's just stick with where the footprints end, the Bigfoot phenomena. Did you because I've not read the book, I'm not going to pretend I have, but did you touch on any other cryptids other than Bigfoot in that book?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'll never forget, we were fortunate enough to have Patrick Harper provide a blurb for Where the Footprints End Volume 1. And the personal hero of mine, of course, with his book Demonic Reality. And I'll never forget, Patrick asked me, he said, well, what's the thesis of your book? And I said, Bigfoot's weird. I mean, that's sort of where it stopped and started. And what I meant by that, really what I should have said, is that you can take a lot of these different subgenres of the supernatural, and you can find those correspondences with Bigfoot. So we end up talking about similarities between Bigfoot and ghosts, which is something that I explored further in Ecology of Souls, which I released 2 years ago. But Bigfoot and ghosts, Bigfoot and fairies, Bigfoot and witches, witch folklore, this association between Bigfoot and mystery lights, ghost lights, that thing.
So shall we cover a few of them?
Sure, certainly.
Because I do want to touch on UFOs as well, to be honest. I don't just want to keep it to cryptids, but we've started on cryptids. So let's have a... What did you discover? UFOs and Bigfoot and lights, Bigfoot and ghosts. Just fill us in on a few of those, please.
Well, there are persistent reports, and me and my co-author of Where the Footprints End, Timothy Renner, part ways a little bit on the frequency of them. He says that they're quite common. I'm not entirely sure about that, but there are persistent reports of Bigfoot doing things that just don't seem to correspond to a flesh and blood primate. And, when you take into account things like Bigfoot in the UK and things, it's like, I don't know if there's really a giant 9-foot tall undiscovered primate running around the woods. It's a little bit more feasible in America, I suppose, in terms of landmass. But, and by that, I mean, you have reports of Bigfoot blinking out of existence in front of someone.
Yeah.
You have Bigfoot phasing through fence lines, passing straight through it. You have a very, very common report is that they seem to glide when they move.
Yeah.
And just things of that ilk are often, do very much call into consideration the fact that they might somehow be related to ghosts. I mean, if you want to be very literal with it, for all we know, they're the ghosts of Gigantopithecus or ghosts of one of humanity's ancestors. I don't know. But you also, there are plenty of encounters of people who get electronic voice phenomena on recordings that when they're out looking for Bigfoot. And this is not something that really gets talked about a lot, but there are reports of that sort of thing happening. There's a great book called Bigfoot by Ann Slayton Alberry that talks about a lot of the strangeness that they've had happen there. Possessions.
Yeah.
While out in the forest while looking for Bigfoot. I mean, it gets really strange.
Well, I don't know about any of that. Enlighten us. Possessions out in forest whilst looking for Bigfoot. It's interesting.
Well, this particular account I cannot remember all the details of, but if memory serves, there was a younger investigator who was out in the Sierras. The the Angeles National Forest, who was investigating on a Bigfoot investigation, and basically sort of fell into a sort of trance that corresponded with a period of heavy Bigfoot activity. The connection, the parapsychological angle of Bigfoot is perhaps even better emphasized by an idea that I came up with, which was the idea of the Wilderness Geist. So you've got poltergeist means noisy ghost, and I coined the term Wilderness Geist for wilderness spirit.
Wilderness, yeah.
And the origins of that idea are the fact that if you take any of the things that people report about and attribute to Bigfoot in the wilderness, things like throwing stones, strange voices, strange smells, strange footprints. If you take any of those and transpose them into a house, you've got a poltergeist case, and the only reason we assume it's Bigfoot is because we're out in the woods and it must be Bigfoot. The knocks and raps, the tree knocks are essentially identical to those that people hear in houses. You can make a case for these gifting sites as being similar to a porch, and sure enough, there are some accounts of Bigfoot appearing at seances. Stan Gooch, who was a parapsychologist, attended a seance where he beheld something in the room that materialized that he couldn't tell whether or not it was sort of an ape man or if it was just a human being clad in furs. But either way, it was something large and shaggy that manifested. And of course, hairy hands are another very common manifestation in some of these seances with mediums as well. Yeah.
Talking about that, and I see Lynn is in because and Peter will be listening. Who'll come to Cliff Tops with me, but Jeremy, who also visits Cliff Tops, he told us a story of his former wife who was doing the ironing at home, so indoors, and she looked down and she could see a huge pair of hairy feet, and they weren't Jeremy's. Nothing else. And he's told us this story a few times. The strangest thing. You're talking about hands manifesting. That's why I brought that up. But where did that come from? That's just absolutely crazy. Then we got the report in Scotland, and I think it was Loch Lomond, and a man and a woman sat on a seat behind a rock face that they thought were granite, perhaps. And a hand came through and touched his partner on the hip. They both saw it. She screamed. There was a physicality to the hand. How do we account for that, Joshua? It's come through us through solid rock, and it's everything's wrong. But
and it's interesting because there are reports, especially collected by Stan Gordon, who focuses on Pennsylvania. There was a very famous 1970s UFO Bigfoot flap that he's talked about. But Stan has collected a lot of stories of literally a Bigfoot, but only visible from the torso down, running through the woods and stuff. So this idea of these disembodied hands, hairy hands, and the like, there's some precedent for that. It was very common in newspapers whenever they encountered something that we would call today Bigfoot to refer to it as a hairy ghost. You find that on both sides of the pond. How do we account for that? I think that, so this is something that I ran into a lot, writing footprints, where the footprints end with Tim Renner, is that there would be people who would cheekily say things like, well, ghosts don't leave footprints. And I'm like, have you read any parapsychology? Like, that was one of the first techniques for ghost hunting, was to spread talcum powder on the floor and wait for footprints to manifest. Ghosts open doors and, move objects. So our it's a false dichotomy, I think, this idea that like, oh, it's either spirit or it's physical and there's nothing in between. I think it's a much blurrier line than we can really account for. So to that extent, can you have something that you would categorize as spirit phenomena that leaves behind hair and feces and footprints? Well, hair and feces is kind of pushing it, certainly footprints. But once you start looking at the fact that this other realm, whatever it is, seems to love to leave us red herrings. You've got apports in the poltergeist cases. You've got saints' relics, some of which are demonstrably not what they claim to be, yet still exhibit famous attributes. You start questioning, is that what we're seeing with this UFO crash debris? Is that what we're seeing with Bigfoot hair? Is it something along those lines that's skirting this boundary between realms? Maybe.
So when you say saints' relics that possibly aren't what they claim to be, yet they still exhibit otherworldly attributes. Are we creating those otherworldly attributes then?
Well, that's sort of where my mind is at right now. Is that somehow we are creating it and we are manifesting it in some form or fashion. And I'll have a lot more to say, a lot more elegantly next year when this project that I'm working on comes out.
So that's the direction the new book's going, is it?
That's the direction my new book is going. It's this idea of I'm working on a couple of different projects, but those are all collaborative. This is the one that I'm doing myself. It's sort of taking a look at, it's very much in line with what we were just discussing, this, physical, non-physical dichotomy. I think that's also the fact-fiction dichotomy too, right? Internal, external, mental, physical. These are all sort of these things that we've been set up to believe that grow more and more uncertain, I think, as we rush headlong into the 21st century.
How are you viewed or received then, Joshua, by the Bigfoot researcher, explorer who's looking for some undiscovered hominid, some running around the forests of America or Alaska?
Well, let me look up some stats for you. Where the footprints in volume. So first of all, the question becomes publicly or privately, right? Where the footprints in volume 1 has 593 ratings and 4.7 stars. Volume 2 is a little bit less, but it's 256 ratings and 4.7 stars. Never been invited to a cryptozoological conference. So I think that probably tells you what the traditional community thinks of, and it's because the cryptozoological community is just really, they want that moment in the future where they say, "I told you so" to the scientific establishment, and I don't think that's necessarily forthcoming. And
No.
I think that it would better serve them to hang out with the weird kids in the cafeteria. You know what I mean? To hang out with the parapsychologists and the ufologists and the people who are talking about consciousness effects and stuff. I think that's where the real frontier for cryptozoology lies. And
well, I think there's been a shift. I think
there has.
we're
That's
moving
the second part of it. Yeah. There has been a shift. I mean, the fact that where the footprints in would have gotten that degree of sort of attention in the first place, I mean, it wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. This where the footprints in was 2020, but for whatever reason, Tim and I really hit the crest of that particular wave. And I have been hearing more and more cryptozoologists, again, a lot of these people who are prominent cryptozoologists I count as friends, and we will have private conversations where they will admit some discrepancies, but there's also the public face that you've got to put on, because that's not what a lot of people are ready for. But to that end, I often joke that if you get the ufologist after their lecture to the bar and you get a couple of pints in them, they'll start opening up about the synchronicities, which are kind of a hard fit for me, at least, into the extraterrestrial paradigm, right? They imply something more metaphysical. Similarly, if you get a couple of drinks into the Bigfoot researcher after their lecture at the conference, they'll say, I really think that this is a giant monkey, but there was this one time when we went out to this place, and every other time we'd had a Bigfoot sighting and we'd collected Bigfoot evidence, but this time there were these strange lights moving through the forest. You can get them to admit their personal experience and the fact that they sense that something is not quite right. And that's where, I believe that there is a reality to the Bigfoot phenomenon, but a lot of me does resonate with some of these skeptical arguments. We should have a body. We should, we should be able to have captured one of these things, where, and I'm aware of the counterpoints and the pros and cons of all those arguments, but I need to reconcile that, right? I need to reconcile my clear-headed thinking with the fact that I've talked to people who are not lying about what they saw, And so how do you you don't have, is there a way to not choose battle lines and to sort of make those?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because everybody's sort of set in their ways and they've probably got their way of thinking and their way of approaching it. But we haven't clashed, but I've sort of had minor arguments, you would say, with people who've said that the hunter got this in his sights and shot it with a 30-yard six. I'm talking about the dogman phenomena now, and it's just stood there. And I'm thinking, well, everything's telling me that this is no normal flesh and blood creature. If you've hit it with a bullet that can drop a moose. And so, but they still don't have it. They still believe that it's some undiscovered creature.
Well, and that's the thing. Wildlife typically in some form or fashion will react to to firearms. I have collected reports of people taking down grizzlies with a pistol, and granted, they're great shots and there's a lot of luck involved, but typically large mammals are not literally bulletproof. But you know what is bulletproof? I collected a couple of stories from the witch trials where dubious accusations aside, there was a long-standing belief that witches were impervious to being stabbed. There was one witch trial where the identity of the accused as a witch was proven because they tried to cut her hair and it actually broke the scissors. So you've got this sort of motif of the indestructible monster.
How old are these stories, Joshua? How far back we're going?
Oh, I suppose this is probably, I don't want to misspeak, so I'm not sure. I can look it up if you'd like for me to.
No, it's fine, but we're going back 100 years more.
Oh, yes, more, yeah, definitely more.
Yeah.
I believe that the scissors were, this was the 1600s, I think.
Right, okay.
So a while back. And that's sort of what I think I would prefer to see more people engaging with, is the idea that, like, there's some sort of space in which these sort of things that we consider tired tropes and myths seem to become a little bit more embodied, and they inform the way that we view these things. And I don't know if Bigfoot literally is invincible to bullets in some form or fashion, but I do think that there is something on the other side of whatever that mask is that is rifling through the Rolodex of our cultural history and being like, oh, they used to say this about, they used to say this about creatures. Maybe I should do that,
So jumping away, not jumping away entirely from Bigfoot, but remote viewing. Have you done any research into remote viewing? And where I'm going with this is, have the remote viewers seen anything akin to a Bigfoot? I've never picked anything up like that in my kind of field. Nobody's come to me and with anything like that. I just wondered.
I do know a lady by the name of Jessica Jones who makes it a point to try remote viewing with cryptid targets. I can't speak to the efficacy of the methods employed there, or the accuracy of the hits. I do know that just cryptids in general, there was a team of remote viewers that at one point was tasked with remote viewing Loch Ness. Have you heard this story?
No, please tell us.
Yeah, so it was the late conspiracy theorist Jim Mars, who sort of wrote about this in one of his books. There was a team of remote viewers who were tasked with viewing Loch Ness, and they indeed did detect the presence of some sort of large animal in the loch, but they said also that it seemed to sort of come and go as it pleased, not come and go from the loch, but come and go from reality, which led some people to speculate that Nessie might be the ghost of a plesiosaur. And who knows? Maybe that's the case, and that sort of buttresses the possibility that Bigfoot is something like a ghost of one of our ancestors. Who knows? But there has been a little bit that's been done with that. Yeah, not as much as there probably should. Yeah,
I got. It's probably 3 or 4 years ago, an email from a guy. We exchanged quite a few, and it's something I still need to follow up in detail. And he said he'd seen a Bigfoot in the UK, but it was moving through the top of the trees, walking.
I adore that. Yeah.
And you'd think to yourself, well, what a load of. But the email were really articulate. Everything was good. The guy, he'd nothing to gain from telling me it,
Here's the thing I've noticed, Paul, and maybe you'll resonate with this, because number one, like, you get to a certain point and you kind of want to hear the wilder stories because you feel like you've heard it all, right? But here's the other thing. Like, when someone comes to me with let's say an alien abduction, and they say, and they go through all the beats of it, and it's just as you might see on the X-Files or in the cinema or whatnot, I do believe them. I default to belief more than skepticism, because I want to treat people as people, right? A lot of these people seem traumatized. But when they say, yeah, it was an alien abduction, and they took me aboard the craft, and they started examining me, and there's something I haven't told people. One of them was wearing a t-shirt that said, "I heart New York." Like, a little detail like that, I really perk up, because and I think that's what really draws me to High Strangeness, is that these absurdities are sometimes so unbelievable and so self-negating and discrediting that you just wouldn't throw that in there if there wasn't something to it.
Yeah. I listened on another podcast, someone else's podcast years ago, and they were relating a dogman experience, and then they said, I'm going to say something now that's going to probably discredit me. And he'd just come out with this most amazing story. And he said it had an earring in. Do you know, he said it turned and it had an earring in. And I'm thinking, yeah, but there's something in it. You're either very clever and how can we not believe it because you've nothing to gain by saying that, or it's the most bizarre thing to say. You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? So, go on then, sorry.
I was just going to say, you know, the dogman thing is really stumped me. And I kind of don't necessarily know how to deal with the segments of the community that think it's flesh and blood, because at least there's some sort of, you know, precedent for something like Bigfoot in the fossil record. Yeah. But dogman is a big ask. But people have these Hollywood ideas of werewolf legends, and they don't really go back and look at like what werewolves were, and so they sort of get the wrong end of the stick on it, so to speak. And
that part of it, Joshua, the werewolf. I took part in Chris Turner's documentary, probably 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer, Elusive, and you may have seen it, I don't know, but I spoke about the werewolf then, and it's not, and I tried to emphasize. And I'm sure a lot of people do. There'll be loads in our chat that will know that it's nothing to do with full moons and silver bullets. Right. That's for movies. And because these stories go back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I don't know if with Dogman, and there'll be people in chat disagreeing with me now, but I don't know if we're dealing with same thing. We've just give it a new name as kind of we've reinvented it.
Well, you'll appreciate this resonance, and it ties back into where the footprints end. There's another subset of reports that I'm sort of obsessed with, which are Bigfoot wearing clothes. Right. This does happen from time to time. And I noticed a recurring theme, and I can't necessarily present these as hard and fast statistics, but I did notice a trend that the most common accessory that Bigfoot seems to wear is a belt. And what was one of the methods by which you could be made a werewolf? It would be to be given an enchanted
girdle.
The girdle, yeah. And so while it's not necessarily a wolf man, it is sort of a hairy human, and that's wearing a belt. So it kind of
and you also get the reports, I don't know if of any recently, but of people who've seen aliens and they've had a belt on. They've had a belt, and with this belt they can do strange and unusual things and or fabulous things. So there's similarities. What about the similarities then, Joshua, to the mind speak that is said to occur with the Bigfoot? The clairvoyant, the clairaudience, where they hear voices in their heads, the alien abduction scenario, people allegedly taken by these beings and they're spoken to inside their heads. It's the same thing, is it?
Yeah, and you mentioned UFOs reframing the debate, and this was one of the central points of that essay that I contributed to that was, if you take away all of the UFO encounters that feature telepathy, you actually lose a lot of encounters. Like, you're probably going to be left with like 20. And I'm talking about like even just structured craft or lights in the sky. People will sometimes have a telepathic relationship. They'll hear a voice, or they'll think, wow, what would be neat to see a UFO? And they'll see a UFO, or they'll think, hey, I wonder if the UFO could, turn east, and it'll turn east. There seems to be some sort of connection there. And so it seems to me as if telepathy is an integral part of the UFO question. You couple that with the fact that people like, Dean Radin, Daryl Bim, Psi is one of those hills that I will die on, right? The existence of Psi phenomena, really great work. But you have these ufologists who are embracing telepathy, which is sort of antithetical to our ideas of physicalism or materialism. So physicalism and materialism aren't the way that the universe works. So we're already swimming in really strange waters. Why do you have to double down on it being a nuts and bolts spacecraft piloted by extraterrestrials? At that point, after you get rid of physicalism and materialism, everything's on the table. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it could get as weird as you want it to get.
I jumping from that, I just say, well, we've got Dave Barker in blue shift, and I've just looked because one's come up in red, and it's Josh Turner saying hi to us. I'm sure you know Josh.
Yeah, hi Josh, how are you?
And we'll be having Josh on Truth Proof.
Great.
Hopefully, if it's the 15th next Thursday, Les, put me a thumbs up. I think we've I can see Les in chat, and yeah, it is. Hopefully, we're going to have Josh on next Thursday, and another great guy. Josh's accounts are some of the best now. He absolutely retells them like nobody. So that's brilliant. Where are you on the what I call the lower silence, what some people would call the Oz factor, but I've termed it the lowest silence because that is prevalent in a lot of, across the board, the full spectrum of unexplained phenomena.
It really is. It's either you get the silence or you get the buzzing, right? It's one of those two things. I'm sympathetic to the idea of a pocket dimension. I am. So where my head has been for the past 2 years, and I'm just now coming out of this fog, is this connection between UFOs and the dead. And that's Ecology of Souls, the two-parter that I wrote, which was very well received. I never want to write anything that big again, but there are a lot of threads to pull on connecting UFO phenomena to the realm of the dead. And I do recall, there being this idea that Sheol, Jewish version of hell, was, described as a realm of silence. It's probably where we get the phrase "quiet as the grave," in addition to just people being dead. So I wonder if there's not something like that. I'm sympathetic to the idea of pocket dimensions. I really don't know what to make of it. I would say that there seems to me, I think that there are some interesting things that people could be looking at that I haven't, but I probably should as well, of, auditory effects during altered states of consciousness. And if that implies something about people remembering when they enter that state or when they exit that state or something along those lines.
Do you think, people say, ask the universe, and it will answer you. That's not my question really, but it kind of applies. A few weeks ago, we put a short out of a young guy who had been in this area and he'd heard some strange sounds whilst camping, almost mechanical, right next to him in a woodland during the night. So it told us this short account, and then on the cliff tops later that week, I'm with my friend Ian and Pete, and I think Jeremy were there, and Martin Abbas. We hear strange sounds. Do you think it's almost contagious, or is it coincidence?
Oh my goodness! Well, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that these phenomena are contagious, especially the UFO stuff. I mean, there seems to be a real contagion factor at play there. Just from seeing a UFO, you can have sort of these pop-off psi effects. As far as contagious from person to person, I have a good friend, Ren Collier, who has speculated that these phenomena aren't in and of themselves some sort of mimetic or noetic virus that's jumping from person to person. I think that I have spent enough time around experiencers to know that things do tend to get a little bit strange when you're hanging out with them. But again, I think that refocus for me, a lot of this does refocus these topics, the supernatural topics, paranormal topics, whatever you want to call it, does refocus them back on the individual, right? There was a time when people who had a lifetime of experiences would be derogatorily called a repeater. And nowadays it's like, no, that you're an experience-prone personality. You're more likely to have these sort of experiences, So I kind of do think that there is a contagious aspect to this.
So can you call on any episodes or that's affected you whilst talking to a witness or gathering stories? Have any strange occurrences happened?
There have been some of the more dramatic ones I don't think I'm allowed to talk about, but
well, let's keep it safe.
Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I have had some odd things happen. But the other side of that is that I find that the things, so often when you go out looking for one thing, you'll get something else differently entirely. I don't know if you found that as well in your experience, but my most recent experience with this, which you might recognize the significance of it before I even explain it, was I was on a Bigfoot outing to North Georgia, and it was a very dull night with one exception. There was about 10 feet between the two cars that we brought out to the site. The site was 15 minutes through private property to a national park. So very, very limited access. I mean, very rugged. We had to choose the type of car that we brought. It was one of those sort of drives. And so towards the end of the night, the two cars are parked where I'm standing with several others in between. The two cars are on either side of us, about 10 feet apart. Everyone is accountable for within eyesight. And I hear very distinctly the sound of a car door slamming somewhere out in the forest. And I look at someone and I said, "Did you hear?" And they said, "A car door slam." And of course, nobody else who's there is realizing the significance of this. But that's an old John Keel observation, the sound of babies crying and car door slamming. It's also something that was reported at the Sierra site that where Ron Moorhead recorded the Sierra sounds, is that there were a lot of strange sounds up there, including the sound of car doors slamming in the literal wilderness when there is no one else around. So it's interesting.
Which is an impossibility, but to me, it strengthens what they're talking about, because you wouldn't throw that in if you'd not heard it, I wouldn't think.
You wouldn't. And so this got me thinking, like, okay, well, the baby crying thing, as horrifying as that sounds, I never want to hear that in the woods, right? But I can find some logic for that, right? Because human beings are hardwired to respond to that. Even if you don't like children, there's something in your, evolutionary brain that will make you pay attention. So that makes sense why the phenomenon would choose that. But why would the phenomenon choose, a car door slamming? And then I said, wait a minute, what does a car door come to signify? I am here, or I am leaving, or I am arrived. It's sort of like it
gets your attention anyway. It certainly gets your attention. Yeah. When we started Wolflands with the gamekeeper in the forest, it started for him with a sphere of light a few days before, or the night before, I think, a few days, that just sprung up from the side of them as they're walking in the darkness on a logging road. From there, it must have been a few days, because he said after that they could hear a baby crying in the forest. He says, and with the other gamekeeper, they would walk to where they perceived they'd heard it, and it would stop and start further deeper in the forest. He said, almost as if they were drawing us in. Yeah. And then he saw his full-blown creature, whilst he's laid in this abandoned farmhouse. So a build-up.
Yeah, that's shades of the will of the wisp. Don't follow the lights, and if you follow the lights, it's always going to be one step ahead of you, and you don't want to know where it's going to lead you, right?
Yeah, no. So what people would call the ghosts, sometimes the light form phenomenon, is just spheres of light. We're all interpreting it different, aren't we? And if the gamekeeper hadn't have seen the creature and heard the baby crying, he'd have just thought he'd seen strange spheres of light in the forest. Maybe had interpreted that as ghost phenomena. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and that sort of comes down to the question, like, how much of this does lie in the eye of the beholder?
Yeah, I suppose our belief system and what fits right in our minds dictates how we view it. That's got to be true, hasn't it? And where do you sit then with ghosts? Have you written about ghosts, Josh?
It's kind of funny. I have, ever since my second book, I started introducing a discussion of ghosts, and obviously when you write something like Ecology of Souls that's dealing with the dead, you have to end up going into a lot of ghost stories. So I have come to write more extensively about ghosts, although it's never my primary focus. Part of the reason I never really started off writing about ghosts, though, is that of all the experiences that I've had, the most can be qualified as ghost experiences. So it's kind of like, well, there's not that much mystery there for me,
Yeah, so you've actually had ghost experiences, or what you would perceive as ghost experiences?
Yeah, I've had a couple of, probably about 5 or so, only 2 that I really think are worth talking about, experiences that are sort of ghost related, and I've had 2 sort of Bigfoot adjacent experiences. I didn't see a Bigfoot, so I can't really say it was a Bigfoot, but I had my first one of my first ghost experiences. I guess this probably would have been my first. I had what might have been a ports at my house when we were adding on to the house. But the thing that was probably the most dramatic was I was at a home that had been used as a hospital during the Civil War. And it was a very narrow staircase to ascend to the top level when you were on the tour. And this meant that one tour group would stay at the top, allow the one group to ascend, and then the group that was waiting would come back down. And I was on the group that was coming up this narrow staircase, and I look over into the crowd that's waiting, and there is a boy, about 13 or 14, wearing a uniform. and looking straight at me, cheeks sunken in, just blank expression, but very clearly. And I said, I went up to my mother and I'm like, wow, that kid was really into it, wasn't it? He was dressed for the occasion. And my mom was like, well, what are you talking about? And so this turned into me asking everyone in my family and on the tour group if they had seen him, including the ticket takers.
You really went into it, check it weren't some kind of character actor, or?
Yeah, no, I ended up asking the ladies who were taking tickets and admission at the front desk, who were the gatekeepers for the property. There was no way you could get in without going past them, and they were like, "No, nobody's come through here dressed up. No reenactors scheduled for today. Nothing like that." So, yeah.
Well, what we'll do, I'm going to ask you about the second one, but I'm going to jump to Les if that's okay, Joshua, and see if we've got any questions. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
And then we'll do the second one. Yeah, we'll start on second ghost. Okay, Les. Your microphone, Les. That's it.
Great show tonight, Joshua and Paul. And you've certainly resonated with everybody in the chat, Joshua, because there's some great questions come through.
Great.
Yeah, so I'll put one up from Bob. And I don't know if you can see this one, Joshua. Bob, has your guest heard any ape-like noises, namely chimpanzee, with regards to the Sasquatch?
Personally, no. The only things that I've heard while out doing my Bigfoot thing is the car door slam, and I did on another occasion hear something walk away from Timothy and I, the co-author of Where the Footprints End, walking away from us and shuffling through the dried leaves, and it was huffing. This was not a huff like a white-tailed deer or anything like that. It definitely sounded like a gruff, deep, perhaps primate sound. I don't know. But others have reported, the sound of hooting and basically the sound of apes and monkeys where there should be none. So that's something that others have heard of, but not me personally.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll go on with another question. Karen Beeman, question for Joshua. Have you had interactions and learnings from the First Nations people that have helped to open your consciousness, leading to interactions? Great question, Karen.
I have had some interactions with First Nations people. I try to rely on their wisdom as much as I can in my books. As far as me having sort of a transcendental experience with any of them, I have not, unfortunately. Sometimes I joke that I'm paranormal kryptonite. I really do.
No worries.
Okay, thanks for the question, Karen. And I've got one from Bob again. Do you think that some Sasquatch may have lost or given up the ability to pass into other dimensions, thus leaving groups around the world? That's a great question, Bob.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to it for certain. I mean, the fact that every culture has a Bigfoot analog, I think, suggests that these are coming from some other place, and who knows, maybe they pop out wherever they pop out and they do get stranded here. I think that's a possibility. One thing that I've always found interesting in entity encounters in general is how often they look surprised. Whenever they see someone, they look surprised as the witness sometimes, and I wonder if you don't have Bigfoot in another dimension using psychedelics and popping over here and being surprised at where they wind up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a question from Usha. Has Joshua heard of people with missing time in the vicinity of cryptids?
Yeah, it doesn't get talked about enough, but it does happen. There are quite a few reports of Bigfoot generating missing time. The first occasion that I was aware of this was Wes Germer, host of Sasquatch Chronicles, had made a passing reference to his initial experience, which was quite frightening. Feeling like it maybe took, I believe the quote was, don't go to the bank with this because I might be misquoting, but let's just say that there was a significant time discrepancy of hours, and the explanation for that for his resident expert at the time was, when people are in dangerous situations, they often feel like time moves really fast. And I'm like, no, that's literally the opposite. Like, there have been laboratory studies determining that your sense of time slows when you're in dangerous situations. And since then, I have discovered more and more individuals who have had missing time in Bigfoot reports specifically. So that is very much a common thing. Haven't seen that as much in the lake monster stuff. Obviously, it's going to be part of the Mothman mythos because that's tied up in UFOs as well. But
did you say lake monster? Lake monster.
Yeah, I have not really found that in lake monster reports. I'm sure that there probably is, but I haven't found missing time in those reports yet.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a question from Fred Flintstone. Hi, Joshua. Have you heard of the Alaskan fae called the Inukkins? Very mischievous by all accounts.
I'm trying to remember the name for the Inuit little people, and I can't recall it off the top of my head. That name specifically doesn't sound familiar, but I have heard of another sort of race of spirit beings that are sort of comparable to the Fae folk who, they do all the things that the ones in Europe do. They tend to abduct people, and they tend to, hang around. So yeah, that's something that specifically does not ring a bell, but I have heard of the same phenomena happening up there too.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah. Question from Karen Beeman. Question for Joshua. Has your ancestry played its part in that it's helped other family members come to you with experiences they've held on to until you opened up the subjects of the paranormal?
Well, I can't speak specifically to the ancestral component, and honestly, my family has always been really open. As I alluded to in the beginning, we never the discussion of these topics was never forbidden. So, as far as them opening up since then, not as much. I will say that I have been challenging my family in various ways with some of my sort of eccentric ideas that I've had since I got involved in this, but can't really say that ancestry has played a point.
Thank you.
A question from Lee Roscoe. What does Joshua think about Bigfoot seen holding an orb?
You do hear those cases from time to time. Without going too far into sort of the symbolism and the archetypes in the chain of custody, you can make a very easy argument that Bigfoot has associations with the devil, by which I mean the Genesis. Folklorists agree that the Genesis for the wild man were fauns and satyrs. Fauns and satyrs were demonized and associated with the devil as, Christianity took over and sort of vilified witches' Sabbath and things like that. And so you've got sort of a chain of custody there, right? Where there's in a lot of places with Bigfoot a lot of places in America with the name devil, place names like Devil's Lake, Devil's, Road, things like that, they often have Bigfoot reports. So maybe if you want to take that approach, there's something demonic with that. And then you look at the orbs, it is a universal belief that the soul is a glowing orb, a glowing ball. You'll find this in just about every civilization. There's been some reference to this, and it's also reported in near-death experiences as well, this glowing light phenomena. So
it's crossing the board, isn't it? It's full, it's touching all the phenomena, isn't it?
So is Bigfoot holding an orb, a demon stealing a soul? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't want to think that either, but who knows? But these are the sort of like symbols that you have to get into if you want to sort of pull out a possibility. The other thing is that Bigfoot just keep glowing orbs as pets, which I think is a charming idea too.
I've not got one myself, but yeah.
Okay, thanks for that question, Lee. I got a question from Tom DeRose. As Josh asked Josh, do you think or agree that Bigfoot and other strange humanoids are not of this plane of existence? I know you touched on this earlier, Joshua.
Well, I have to confess to a certain degree of agnosticism about that. I think that as the years go on since we released Where the Footprints End, I've become more and more sympathetic to Timothy Renner's assessment, was that something more along the lines of Bigfoot being an embodied archetype or an archetype made flesh. And, the most common version of that, of the wild man archetype manifesting, is stones thrown in the woods or wood knocks or footprints. And the rarest form of it is when the archetype somehow gets enough, mental focus, energy, power, what have you, to actually appear, as a full apparition. That's sort of where my thinking has come over the years. So in that sense, yes. Yeah.
Okay. And we've got a question from David Barker, and it's the age-old question. With all the trail cams and mobile phones, why is Bigfoot still so elusive?
I mean, that's exactly what I was getting at when I was talking about, resonating with these skeptical arguments. We should have it. We should have something a little bit more ironclad than we do. And yet, I talk to these people there's no doubt in my mind that not only are they telling the truth, but they got a very good look at what they saw. So how do you reconcile those things? Yeah.
And that question, sorry, that question comes from somebody with a very open mind. He's seen some incredible things, Dave. But sorry for cutting across you there.
Oh no. I mean, so that's one point. If you want to tie in, my friend Soraya Azkath from the podcast Where Did the Road Go has mentioned this before. If you want to take a more John Keel perspective and think about these things on a super spectrum of light, they might predominantly inhabit a spectrum of a portion of the visible spectrum that our cameras don't pick up. And then sometimes they pop over from that spectrum to be perceived with the human eye. Who knows, And
then you're going to get people just saying, well, you're just moving the goalposts.
Yeah, right.
I'm agreeing with you, but seriously, that's what's going to happen, isn't it?
I get it, except, my response to those people would be, it doesn't matter if you move the goalposts if you're not playing a game. I'm not trying to win the game. I'm just trying to figure out where the field is.
Yeah. Hang on. Right,
and I think it's been suggested also that these creatures, beings, call them what you will, flesh and blood, detect that there's this equipment around, Joshua, and then they don't appear.
Yeah, that's the other side of it, is that, perhaps they can actually see in the infrared spectrum, and all of these game cams, do give off, they'd throw off a visible portion if you were able to look at them in that capacity. So, and if someone set up a camera in my living room, I'd probably know exactly where it is too. So, and avoid it. So there's another side to that argument as well. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, brilliant. I've got a question from Tom DeRose, not Bigfoot, but why are ghosts nearly always seen at night in the dark? What is this about?
There's a really interesting line of speculation regarding this that was brought to my attention by Dr. Jack Hunter from Wales, who speculates that these phenomena to varying degrees might be photophobic. He bases this speculation off the fact that ectoplasm in seances with mediums would often snap back into the medium if a flash was taken, and sometimes even injure the medium. So there might be some sort of photophobic aspect of this. And we do see, this as being something that's been handed down from, ancient traditions. There was at one point, and I'm not going to try to repeat the Latin, and I'll probably even mess up the translation, but there was, I believe, from classical antiquity, a phrase that, the night belongs to the dead or something like that. So that's one possible answer for that.
Yeah, it's a good answer as well.
I wish it was mine. It's Dr. Jack's.
And Thomas got another question in tonight. How does something physical manifest through consciousness?
Yeah, that's the eternal question, isn't it? I mean, and I don't know if I really have a very good answer for that. If you ascribe to an alternate philosophy rather than physicalism or materialism, something like idealism, the idea that matter is derivative of consciousness, that goes a long way towards explaining that. But I really don't know. What I will say is that I've got an iPad right here, and that began as an idea. And while there were designers and engineers and factories that made it, there might be other ways for bringing ideas into material form.
Great answer. And thanks for the question, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question.
Yeah.
I've been wrestling with it a lot lately.
John Doe is asking, have you heard of the Swan Lake Bigfoot YouTube channel? He has captured Bigfoot as reflections in his sunglasses, but he couldn't see them in his camera, and his camera didn't pick them up either.
No, but I'm looking that up right now, and I will take a look into that because that sounds fascinating.
I think we're all typing away now, John. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting if that's the case. And while we're having a look at that, I'll look for the YouTube channel. I've got to thank Karen Beerman for the monetary donation tonight. Thanks, Karen. Always appreciated as usual. Josh Turner with a substantial gift tonight to the channel. Thanks, Josh. Okay.
Yeah, and we just value support, and thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely, thank you. And everybody who's contributing now, we've got 170, 180 people watching as we speak, and it's brilliant. And it's your show, guys. So if you've got more questions for Josh, just fire them away. If not, we shall move on to.
Do you want me to finish? They've got a few on my list. Do you want me to finish these off on this?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, are you good with this, Josh?
Yeah, I might need a 30-second break at some point in the near future, but.
Well, why don't we do that then, and we'll talk about Truth Proof for 10 minutes if you want to do that, or.
All right, yeah. I'll be right back. Give me one moment.
Yeah, okay. No worries. It's all good.
Worries. Well,
excellent. So, as we spoke about earlier, we've been out filming this week, Les, haven't we?
Yeah, we did a little bit in Lincolnshire, up that way, and so we had to cross the border from Yorkshire to Lincolnshire. Get our passports organised and things like that.
I left the Vale, I finally left the Vale, but it were okay, and I survived it, and it were all good.
So that is for the next film, working title Wolflands 2, but no doubt we'll come up with a little bit better title than that.
Definitely, and a cryptid account, but a little bit closer to people, not in remote areas. We've just moved a little bit with this one. We're still in the forests for part of it, but we're shifting, and we're coming a little bit closer to suburbia. And anybody out there who's got any of these accounts to share with us, feel free to get in touch. It's all good. I'm looking forward to it in Josh and his second ghost account, but we can finish these questions off if you want, Les.
Right. Okay then, and let's have a look. Don't know if this is a question. Mike, the disabled Welshman. Personally, I don't think there is such things as werewolves because it's totally impossible for a human to transform himself or herself into an animal at will.
We kind of touched on it, Mike, didn't we? It's not about movies, but I'll let Josh.
Yeah, my pushback. It's kind of an interesting topic for me. A lot of this problem is also tied into the fact that we in modern society have lost a lot of the way that we think of the human soul. A lot of traditions emphasized, doctrines of polypsychism, the idea that we don't have one soul, but there are multiple souls within us, sometimes a zoomorphic soul that could actually wander about and go about of its own volition when we were in states of trance or illness or sleep. And that seems to be what a lot of these werewolf legends were describing in their original form. There are these really quite ancient indigenous ideas that you would either a magically operant person or, just someone by accident would have a piece of themselves, or if you believe in one soul, their own soul, exit their body, take on the form of a wolf. And the injuries that were inflicted on the wolf would then be reflected on the body, very much in the same way that we see that in stigmata, dream injuries, and I would argue alien abductions, which I suspect now more than ever are metaphysical rather than always physical. There's a physical component there. We've discussed how that's sort of a difficult thing to wrap your head around. But there's also a fascinating paper. I cannot remember. It's on Academia or ResearchGate or one of those websites, but a fascinating paper by someone who took a look at what he called werewolf shamans around the Adena Mounds here in the United States, where there were actually people whose job was to play the role of a wolf in some of the rituals in these near these ancient earthworks. And they would actually remove a portion of their teeth enough so that they could actually fit a wolf jawbone, the upper part, into their mouth. And actually that coupled with a wolf pelt would actually sort of take on and embody the spirit of the wolf. And interestingly enough, you can draw a relatively strong correlation between dogman sightings here in the U.S. and some of these ancient mound building culture sites as well. So is it someone actually fully fulfilling that potential of the werewolf shaman from way back when? I don't know. But I think when you look at this in other angles, sometimes metaphorical, sometimes metaphysical, sometimes symbolic, I don't know. But if you look at it from a different angle than just the physical transformation of a person to a wolf, it opens up a lot of possibilities that I think are worthy of consideration.
Thank you. Great answer.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'll call that done for this period, Paul, and I'll come back later with some more questions.
Okay, then. So I don't know if you want to finish your second ghost sighting experience, please?
Yeah. So this would have been 2007, 2008. Before I realized how much I was into these topics, I was dating a girl who had a group of friends who went ghost hunting, and we went to Waverly Hills Sanitarium in up near the Kentucky-Ohio border. Very famous haunted site here in the U.S., a tuberculosis retreat. Supposedly the site of one of the largest unmarked graves in America. There were people dying at a rate of 1 every hour, 24 hours a day at one point. A very active night, and I was being far too cheeky when I got there, probably as a self-defense mechanism. But I remember we were on one of the floors, I believe it was the 4th floor, and my girlfriend had seen something that had spooked her, and she seemed more sensitive than I ever was. And I was just sort of laughing it off. I was playing the part of Hellboy in my mind, right? Just being really cheeky and sort of blue collar paranormal investigator sort of way. And I'll never forget this. And this was the real moment when this is after I'd seen the soldier ghost, but for some reason I was able to talk myself out of that for a lot of the reasons that you alluded to. Like, well, maybe someone snuck in, right? But this was my real, you cannot get the toothpaste back in the tube moment. I approached a stairwell, and when I was probably 4 or 5 feet away from this door that led into the stairwell, big, thick steel door, it goes from completely shut to slamming open right in front of me. And like someone was on the other side and had just kicked the snot out of this door and slammed it open so that it hit the wall behind it. And I screamed like a girl. But that's the moment that where I was like, and I'll never forget, because I'd seen some. I remember Waverly is. Sorry, I'm rambling here. Waverly is shaped like a sort of wide U. And so every time on that same floor, I'd get to the corner, I'd see what looked exactly like someone, the blue glow from the old TVs looked exactly like someone was watching TV just around the corner. You'd turn the corner, there'll be nothing there. Pitch black. I remember that vividly. I'm kind of getting chills, but I'll never forget between that and, a couple of other less dramatic experiences in the door. I'll never forget, laying in bed back at her friend's place in Cincinnati, staring at the ceiling as the dawn came through the window, being like, oh, this is this is all very real. That was my can't get the toothpaste back in the tube moment.
Yeah, fabulous. And thank you for sharing them. So can we jump on to UFOs? And well, we
Certainly.
can't literally, but let's because I know you will have researched the UFO phenomena, but what about the alien abduction phenomena? People really I've written Night People about my own experiences. I've no recollection of being aboard anything. I'll be honest with you. Everything that happened in my bedroom or in the property. So what's your take on the abduction scenario?
Excuse me. I have to speak a little bit carefully about it because I have not had any UFO experiences. So sometimes when I put forth ideas, people think I'm saying this is how it is, or, anybody who says anything different is not telling the truth. Far from it. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. Your take on it
is going to be just as valid.
I first of all think that ufology would probably do itself a favor by being more cautious about connecting alien abductions and things seen in the sky. Yes, there are plenty of cases where those two things go together, but there are a lot of alien abductions that don't feature craft, or where things do seem to happen in the bedroom. There does seem to be a physical component to this, but as we talked about with werewolves and Bigfoot and ghosts leaving footprints in talcum powder, I'm not sure that doesn't mean that there's also not a metaphysical component to this. I have read a lot of accounts of people and have some friends who are regular astral travelers who have told me, in no uncertain terms, that I'm pretty sure this is the space that alien abductions happen in. And, there's so many similarities between near-death experiences and alien abductions, as, emphasized by Kenneth Ring and loads of other research, that it does seem to be something that's happening in the out-of-body state. Now, the complaint about the primary pushback is that, well, people have injuries, but we already talked about stigmata and werewolves and all these things about some injuries to the astral self being reflected on the physical self. So maybe that's what's going on in those respects. There are quite a few cases where people have their cars taken with them. So, I don't necessarily think that cars have souls, unless you want to go down this sort of panpsychism rabbit hole that I'm willing to endure. But I think that more often than not, we're looking at something that is happening on a metaphysical level, and that ties into my own personal feelings about the UFO question, which the older I get, the less and less patience I have for the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Do you know, Josh, when I say alien, people in chat will have heard me say this, I don't necessarily mean alien from outer space. I'm on about alien to what we would understand as being normal. So I'm not subscribing to the fact that I've been taken by anything in a spaceship. But I know something did happen during childhood. But I've no recollection, as some people have been taken on board craft and all of the things that go with hand in hand with that. So are aliens what people would have hundreds of years ago called demons, in your opinion? Are we dealing with the same thing?
I mean, I default back to my sort of assessment of their similarities to the fairy folk and whatnot. I think that there's something that likes to play with us. I mean, you look back at what Emanuel Swedenborg said, back in the 1700s. He said, spirits lie. They just tell you things that aren't true. Absolutely. So the fact that these beings say that they're from, Zebel Ganubi or Zeta Reticuli or whatever, I don't think is necessarily ironclad evidence in that regard. I'm not denying that the UFO doesn't have a stellar shape, but, something I go to great lengths to emphasize in Ecology of Souls is that, just because it has a stellar shape doesn't mean it's literally from the stars. I mean, a lot of these ancient cultures place the underworld in the stars. The underworld was the part of the night sky that was below the ecliptic, below the path of the sun. You've got the Egyptians going to, depending on whether you were a pharaoh or a peasant or whatever, Egyptians going to the afterlife in the night boat that sails across the sky. So I think that while there's all this sort of astral or stellar symbolism embedded in the UFO phenomena, I don't know if that always means that we're dealing with extraterrestrials of the flesh and blood variety. I do think that it's possible that we've been visited in some capacity, but I'm not sure if that is the solution for the lion's share of the phenomenon that we see.
So I mean, there's so many possibilities of where they could be coming from, I suppose. I mean, if we kept it on the physical, so are they coming from outer space? Are they living within the earth? Are they living amongst us? Or are they living in the oceans of the world? I mean, have you any views on any of that?
I mean,
please, for more questions for Josh, if you've got them.
No, that's a great question, and
No,
I mean, I think all those are on the table, quite frankly. I am sympathetic. I don't like using the term interdimensional because it's such a placeholder. I don't think any of us really quite grasp what that means. I'm not sure that it's impossible in this particular dimension to grasp what other dimensions means, right? But I am sympathetic to that as a scientific placeholder for what other cultures would have called the spirit world or Tirnanog or the afterlife or any number of sort of other worlds. I think so. If you want to call me an interdimensionalist, I suppose that's where I am. But I do tend to view now, and again, I hope this changes with every book as it's changing with my next project, but I have been for a while viewing the UFO as a reinvention of the Psychopomps boat. These Psychopomps, these characters who take the human dead across the threshold, characters like Karen, across the river Styx and Anubis and whatnot. Boats are a death symbol. They always have been. Like our first caskets as a species were probably repurposed canoes. You've got ships as grave goods in Norse burials and Egyptian burials. Ships are a death symbol. But what happens when a culture becomes global and maps every part of the globe and finds out that the afterlife or the other world doesn't lie beyond that mountain range, and it's not on the end of the horizon, and it doesn't seem to be below our feet? Where do we put that other world? I think we put it in the sky. And since Psychopomps are transportation symbolisms, they're transportation deities, they take souls to the other world just as fairies would sometimes too. I think that it makes sense that they would appropriate the image of the flying saucer, because ufology is a transportation obsessed discipline, right? Like where do they come from? Where are they going? Where are they taking me? How do they get here? Like it's always transportation place questions that we have. Those are the primary questions. And it makes sense that, to me, that the UFO is the Psychopomps boat.
I like what you touched on earlier. Well, probably knowingly, but you almost implied that your next books might change and the thinking will change from the first books. And I think that's where everything's gone wrong in the past. Somebody's written something and that's what I think, and I'm not changing my mind, even if the proof appears that shows that I were wrong. Yeah. You implied then that your books are going to change constantly as you're digging deeper into it.
I hope they do. I mean, so this is something that, I sort of had drilled into my head by my mentor, Greg Bishop, was that, you always be interrogating yourself. That old Robert Anton Wilson thing, check yourself for your own BS belief system, belief system. And and so you really interrogate it, push where there's mush. If you don't like something, look into it further, because, as Terrence McKenna said, if it's real, it can handle the pressure, right?
Absolutely.
And so all these things have to reconcile. All these things have to reconcile, and because I don't want to just disbelieve someone because it doesn't fit my own biases. So I have to look at stories of pre-birth memories aboard UFOs. Do I feel really comfortable doing that? Not for any ideological or religious reason, but no, they kind of just weird me out. I don't know. It just feels kind of strange. But that's a big part of what I looked at in Ecology of Souls, in addition to the death angle.
Yeah.
And so I always like to I would be very disappointed if we had this same conversation in another 5 years and I was still talking about UFOs in the dead, or, it's I feel like it's important to keep on taking in more information and refining what you think. And if it doesn't conflict with what you said in the past, great, but try to push yourself.
Just keep pushing it. And I want to, in a moment, just go back to the missing time. But before we do that, because I think we said we were going to do it at 8 and I forgot, so apologies. Tell people where they can find out about Joshua Cutchin, the books, the research. If they want to contact you, just give us a lowdown on that, please.
Yeah, the one-stop shop for everything about me is joshuacutchin.com. That's JOSHUACUTCHIN.com. No S, just one cut chin. And that has links to every interview that I've done. Maybe once every 3 years I'll actually blog. Mostly it's just news about appearances and whatnot, and links to all my books. I know you have a lot of UK listeners, and I've gotten a lot of requests. Normally, I just don't trust the Post. Even here in the US it can be a bit dodgy. But if there's anyone in the continental US who's listening, we can arrange for me to send sets of my books at reduced cost. Signed by myself, like direct sales from me. Otherwise, if you're overseas, unfortunately, probably the best place to look for my work is on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or something like that.
Brilliant, thank you. And any work planned in future? Any future books that you're requiring research for that anybody here might be able to help you with, as in contribute information?
Oh my goodness! If anyone stumbles across stories where fictional characters step into the real world, send them my way, and the stranger the better. So if you see a Muppet walking down the street, let me know.
There's plenty of Muppets walking down the street,
and it's my current line of thinking, like trying to suss out this dividing line between fact and fiction. That's a good example of what I was talking about going to places that make me uncomfortable. I read a story about someone seeing Donald Duck in their bedroom, and I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I don't want to believe that. But as it turns out, stories of fictional incursions
So what do you think is happening there then? And I'll just briefly, before you start it, I know I've asked the question and then stopped you. It was pretty active about 10 years ago here at this property where I am. And I people in chat know that I go out at stupid o'clock in the morning. I'll head off out at 3, 4 in the morning and come back at 7, 8 o'clock. My wife's not got a great interest in the unexplained. She's probably like vast majority of people. She tolerates me because she's got to do. I suppose. But when I came back home, she said, strangest thing, Paul. I said, what? And she said she were awake. She don't do drugs. You know, she's not been drinking
Mhm.
alcohol. She woke up early in the morning and looked, and the top of the walls in our bedroom, she could see the characters from Scooby-Doo. How
I love
crazy!
it.
Yeah, well, I'll just before you give me your views on that, when I were writing, I don't know what it was. I think it was Truth Proof 3. And Carl, who were editing the book and helping me with it, and I told him about it, and I said Scooby-Doo. He says Scooby don't. That's what he says. He says don't. You know, but it. You know, she doesn't come out with things like that. You know, it was just the strangest thing. What I said, were you asleep? She said, no, I could see him. How weird.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that I've discovered about going into this particular avenue of research is that, like, if there, I don't think that there's a more mistreated subset of experiences than this topic, right? Because, like, even people who will believe that, you know, Ashtar will ascend your third eye into the X dimension, like, they still think these stories are nutso, right? Where you see fictional characters. As far as what I think's going on, part of me wants to play it close to the chest. I'm working on an idea, and I kind of don't want to get scooped. But I think that I suspect that it really does come back to what we were talking about earlier, about this sort of false dichotomy that we set up. And an idea that I'm really fond of, that I've been mentioning some lately and will be part of the book, is this idea that the UFO, just to take one subset of this that I think sheds some light on this idea of fictional characters coming into our lives, the UFO is a mirror of ourselves. You know, I think that because anybody who tells you that UFOs are predominantly psychic or predominantly physical, they're both lying. Like, they're all, you know, it's not one or the other. There's something in between. And the way that I've come to look at it is that we are predominantly physical with an important psychic component. You know, I'm not saying that we weren't meant to be more than the physical cells or anything, but I'm just telling you, when I wake up, I feel my body. Like, I feel the aches and pains, right? So we're embedded in the physical with an important aspect of ourselves that is psychic. And I think that the UFO is the mirror of that. I think it's predominantly in that psychic realm with an important aspect that can traverse into the physical and leave behind burn marks in the ground and metamaterials and all these sort of things that we're talking about. And so what happens when you take that idea of something being neither one or the other and you apply that to something like fiction? And look, I'll be honest with you. I'm surprised by the number of friends that I have. So I have some friends in the fiction world who are authors who are staunch atheist types, don't believe in a thing, materialist, physicalist, no supernatural stuff. And I'll talk to them and they'll be like, yeah, you know, I wanted to do this with my character or that with my character, but they wouldn't let me do it. And I'm like, come again, you know? And they're like, you know, my character wouldn't let me do this. I'm like, do you hear what you're saying? You know, there's a certain level of autonomy there that I think a lot of us take for granted. And, you know, heaps of authors and creative types will say the exact same thing. You know, we were talking beforehand off the air about where the title for Where the Footprints End came from. We were talking about where I got that idea for that title. Just came to me literally from nowhere. So I think sort of exploring that nowhere space is something that is long overdue. And some people have done it here and there, but I don't think that anybody has really taken a look at that and said, what does this say about UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, things like that? So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't, we've probably devoted loads of time to the cryptid phenomena.
That's fine.
During the making of Wolflands, I picked up on the fact that the three men in the forest who'd got trapped, they couldn't get out that night when this thing was stood observing them. But I think, and you know, some of them one of them definitely will be watching this, and I think there's an element of missing time there because they cannot remember, Josh, how long it was watching. One says it was watching for a few hours, yet both agree that it had gone during the daylight. As daylight approached, it had gone. They all agree that they'd seen it around midnight, and there's a lot of confusion. And we've even got one, and I don't think Les knows about this, and I'm not going to go into detail until I've spoken to the gamekeeper, but there's more information come to light with the gamekeeper now. But I need to speak to him and just find out if I'm okay to talk about that. But I'm wondering how much actual missing time there is with these accounts, because I'm finding it and I've not looked for it. Do you know?
I think if you keep digging, you'll find it. I mean, part of what Ecology of Souls did, Kenneth Ring had compared NDEs to UFO encounters. Eddie Bullard back in the 80s, if you can believe it, still boggles my mind that he was making this observation back then, was comparing shamanic initiations to UFO encounters. And, UFOs can be compared to the fairies. And like the missing time anomaly thing pops up in every single one of those. You can find that in shamanic journeying. There's a missing time or sort of compressed time component. It's a very common thing in near-death experiences. It's obviously a hallmark of UFO experiences. And it's, reflected in those stories of going to fairyland for a day and coming back generations later. We've talked about it being in the cryptid stuff, so I think if you sort of dig into it, you will find it. I even talked to a ghost hunter one time who did an overnight exploration, or rather investigation, of a supposedly haunted gas station. And while the night was very dead, he was a diligent investigator in the sense that he, regardless of whether or not the batteries were depleted, he always put brand new batteries into his equipment every time without fail. And in that one night, his batteries were corroded. And that doesn't happen overnight. Like, there's no way to make that happen. There's no environmental factor except for time, really, that's going to make that happen. And it's not going to happen overnight. So I think that the time component is something that you will always find. The problem is people don't look at their watches. So,
you've just, I'm guilty here. You've just brought something up there, Joshua, that's interesting, because we get a lot of researchers, and we've experienced it as well, where we know all our equipment is charged, 100% charge. And I don't know the time span that we assume is taking place, but as batteries are depleted, we're at, I don't know, 0% on as batteries, yet we only seem to have been using equipment for half an hour. I'm not saying we've experienced missing time, but it's an angle that I'd not thought of that you've just thrown at me.
Yeah, that the idea is, these forces are drawing power from the batteries, but what if time is just affecting your battery differently than it's affecting you?
Seriously, because the angle that you've just said, so some unknown force is depleting the energy. It's sort of sucking the energy out of the electrical equipment. Was the row tower going down? And I'm not going to say, I'm going to change my mind now, but it's got to be looked at. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's a possibility. So I would be surprised if there aren't. Again, it's kind of the problem that I ran into when writing The Brimstone Deceit, is that you get these descriptions whenever people would think to mention a smell. It would always be, they'd have to be sort of approximating and equivocating and kind of vague and comparing it to something else and using terminology that wasn't quite specific. And you sort of had to sort of try to read between the lines to figure out, within the context of how they described it, exactly the smell that they were describing. It's kind of a similar problem with missing time. If someone doesn't look at their watch, I don't know if I'm looking out my window here. Like, I don't know if I would have noticed any changes in the light between when we started and now, so it's just
we were on the cliff tops a few weeks ago, and everybody who knows me knows I'm useless with phones, but Ian's got the app on his phone. I had it on mine. I took it off because my daughter kept telling me where I was everywhere I went. She would be, "Oh, why are you in that place, Dad? Why are you there?" So he knows where he is. So there's about 4 of us on cliff tops. So he's got this app that's telling him, pinpointing exactly where he is. But the journey showed that either as a group we travelled or he travelled 5 miles inland. And it actually shows it. Yet Jeremy, who was with us, with a different app, but that does the same thing, showed him as Jesus. He were walking on water. He'd gone out to sea. But the same night. And we've got the images. We've got the data. It's all there. It don't make sense at all, really.
Paul, do you ever get the impression that trying to make sense of some of this stuff is a fool's errand? It's always going to upend your expectations. There's not going to be a logical answer for it. It just happens. Absolutely. It just is, Yeah.
It doesn't stop us looking. We've got about 15-20 minutes left, Joshua, and I don't want to go to questions just yet. I just want to touch on OBEs, near-death experiences. Yeah. Have you any information or knowledge that you want to share with us about those?
Right. Well, I mentioned earlier how psi phenomena was like the one hill that I would die on, but a close second to that is the near-death experience. There's so many of these accounts that have veridical third-party confirmation. It's just a problem of being able to test it because you can't, induce a near-death experience for ethical reasons. There were some efforts that were undertaken a couple of years ago, I believe it was in Canada, of trying to place pictures at the top in awkward spaces towards the top of the ceiling in hospitals, without any of the staff knowing, and seeing if people would report those pictures to sort of provide confirmation.
Yeah.
There weren't enough people who, I think out of this enormous sample size, maybe 2 people had enough experiences to qualify under Bruce Grayson's NDE criteria. So I just don't know if there's a way to prove that in a laboratory like you can kind of prove psi, but the near-death experience is incredibly compelling. Just the retrieval of information that people shouldn't have and things along those lines.
Have you any examples that our listeners love?
So, well, there's that famous example of a woman in, I believe it was Washington, who described seeing a sneaker on the ledge of the hospital and describing it in detail. And everybody's like, what? Why would there be a shoe? And so finally they searched the entire hospital, and sure enough, one of the ledges out of sight of the window, you had to open up the window and look out, had a shoe to her exact description. Some of my favorite stories, there's another story that PMH Atwater told. I did a lot of near-death experience research for Ecology of Souls, so I'm a bit better versed on this. But another story that I believe was PMH Atwater shared was a young lady who had a near-death experience, clinical death, all the things that you would expect. And she comes back and says, I believe it was her uncle. My uncle so-and-so's dead. And they're like, what are you talking about? I just talked to him on the phone earlier today. What are you talking about? And she's like, no, he's dead. I met him over there. And they call him up on the phone and they can't get a hold of him. And he had passed sometime since that morning as well.
Yes. So
there's just no, I'm getting chills talking about this because there's, you can sort of, if that story is as presented, smoking gun. And I'm not sure what it's a smoking gun for. It's not necessarily the survival of life after death. Maybe it's another psi phenomena thing going on.
So people who've died and then come back, I've heard that people have just reported there was nothing. It was just black. There was no. Well, that implies, but to report there was nothing and it was just black implies there was something, because they've got a conscious
to see the darkness.
So am I being hopeful then, thinking, well, no, probably that's just the transition period until you're moved on?
Yeah, my friend Soraya mentioned the fact that near-death experiences don't seem like they're anything for that side. They're always they're designed to facilitate some sort of change on this side of death. So I'm not sure. I think that, but at the same time, I don't remember every dream that I have.
No.
So. And I do think this is sort of a similar mechanism. The ancient classical culture hypnos was the brother of Thanatos, sleep and dreams. So, there's always been a connection between sleep and death, Hypnos and Thanatos. There's always been a connection between sleep and death. So maybe it's a similar, mechanism at play. I mean, similarly, people don't always remember their abduction experiences unless they journal them or something sometimes.
Well, it took me from childhood till I don't know when I did till 2019, and there's nothing in that book, Night People, that could give you a timeline of any event. It's just little cameos of things that I remember.
Yeah, and images and
nothing else.
So but I do think that, and again, this was sort of the driving thesis of Ecology of Souls. You can place into dialogue shamanic initiations, near-death experiences, fairy encounters, UFO encounters. All these different things have a lot more in common than we've been led to believe.
Yeah.
The connections between fairies and the dead, no one hardly ever talks about, but there's so many there.
But I think that's going to be a discussion for another time, to be honest, Josh, because I'm going to jump to Les, because I'm sure we've got some questions. And are you good for the last 10-15 minutes to answer some questions?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. We'll bring Les on. He's ready to go.
Okay. Right. Yeah, thank you. We've got some questions, and I've got some observations. So we'll put the questions on first. David Drummond is asking, Dogman Earring, have you ever seen the photos of the hairy people that came from Mandalay in the 19th century that looked like werewolves and wore earrings?
No,
I
I
don't
haven't.
think I have either. Yeah.
No.
But thanks for. I'll make a note of that, David, and thank you. We'll have a look at that. I don't know how old the story is, but it says 19th century, so we shall see.
Enigma. Bigfoot or aliens wearing partial clothes or earrings, etc. Sounds like when AI goes wrong. Could this be down to faulty cloaking or a poor attempt at representing themselves?
Oh, I have so much to say about that. There are certain traditions, especially in Scandinavia, where the Fey folk had hollow backs. There was a great quote from that Anne Slayton Alberry book about a zoologist who was examining some three-toed Bigfoot tracks, which are a thing, as strange as that sounds. And he made the observation that it's almost like they waited till the last minute to make the feed. I think that there's something there. The defects of the fairies were something that was a way to identify the Fey folk. They'd appear normal except for one strange anomaly, something that was drastically different size in terms of paired organs or something like that. So something to that thread to pull on, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And let's have a look. Question from Debbie Shaw. Thanks for the question, Debbie. Joshua, do you think synchronicity fits into the understanding of the phenomenon?
It's every now and then you run across a body of work that you don't necessarily want to admit is great, but it is. And I've talked to him, and he knows how I feel about it. Eric Wargo's work on time loops, it's top notch. He just released a new book called From Nowhere, and I think that so much of that is accurate. I think a lot of these synchronicities might be attributable to what he calls pre-membering. So the idea is that the thing that happens in the future resonates back towards you to the past and causes you to have what seems like a premonition, but it's actually retrocausal. Makes my brain hurt, but I think that there's part of that that's going on as well. Can't account for every synchronicity, I don't think, but yeah, I think so. I think that's part of it, is this time component that we've been dancing around.
Yeah.
But I've noticed myself that synchronicities do have a dramatic uptick when I'm on the right path or when I'm into a research project. Things will come to me that are really quite striking.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, and Tia is coming with a donation tonight. Thanks for the donation, Tia. And says Joshua is very coherent. I like it. Great show, guys. Well, there we are.
Thank you.
We've got a pat on the back, especially you, Joshua, tonight.
Yeah, well, why not? He's left me with nothing to do, really. It's been great.
Okay, we've got Dragonborn. What are Joshua's thoughts on the possible existence of vampires?
Well, now's a bad time to ask me because I'm talking about Muppets coming to life. So, yeah, why not vampires, right? There are certain... I have some friends who think that the Strigoi and the Greys are the same thing. There's something about this persistent motif of having life energy or life force taken from you by another intelligence. So, as far as literal, contagious fanged vampires, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I do think that there is something potent and at least metaphorically, if not literally true, about certain entities existing out there that can draw upon your life force, be it blood or be it, your energy.
Yeah, it just seems a common thing to say, doesn't it? Energy vampires, but you can be around certain individuals. And,
oh, yeah.
Probably they're not even knowing that they're doing it, but they just absolutely drain you, don't they?
You can be related to certain individuals that are like that.
Okay, I've got a question there from James Moffat. Are UFOs once in this planet because theirs got destroyed? Do you think?
Who could say?
Well, it depends on what you think they are. I mean, you've got this constant refrain from abduction researchers that not only are they telling us that the world's going to end, but they also want our genetic material because their race has atrophied. You'll find those same illusions in some fairy folklore, the idea that they need sort of a fresh infusion of new blood to keep their race from dying. And I have to say, I really do appreciate, even though don't entirely agree. I do appreciate the work of Dr. Michael Masters, who's seriously considering the idea that these are time travelers from the future coming back. Why would you go to that effort? I don't think it's time tourism. I think it's to avert some sort of catastrophe, perhaps. So it's entirely possible. It just exactly what we mean by UFOs is the real question there. Yeah.
So just I mean, obviously, I've got no idea, but if they're coming back to avert a catastrophe, would that imply that if there was a catastrophe, they'd cease to exist?
Well, it depends on the scope of the catastrophe. Maybe they go go underground like the Eloi and the Morlocks. So who knows?
Okay, I'll move on with a question from John Blatt. Can Joshua share some of the ways we can ward off or protect ourselves from some of these phenomena? Any ways to ward off or repel cryptids like Sasquatch?
Well, depends on the phenomena, but I don't think you can really go wrong with iron. Can't go wrong with salt. And look, even if you're not a religious person, you can't go wrong with prayer. I've heard too many stories about people having negative experiences that can be warded off with prayer. Doesn't sound like it necessarily matters who or what you're praying to. So I think there's something about the power of belief that's important. As far as warding,
it's like almost a placebo, isn't it? Then we're creating it, aren't we?
Well, there's also that old belief that if you name the demon, you can bind them, right? So there's something about the introduction of language into these scenarios that I think breaks a spell. But also, as far as warding off cryptids, put up game cams. Like you think I'm joking, but I have been to some research sites where I have been assured that, this was the most active site in state XYZ until the owner decided to put up game cams to try to catch evidence, and then all goes away.
Yeah, fabulous. All right, Les.
Yeah, and a couple of light-hearted comments here, Paul. Lee Roscoe, Paul, does Mary Sinclair love cartoons?
Yeah, well, she's married me, so yes, probably does. I'm a bit of a cartoon at times. Yeah, it's just a strange one, wasn't it? She's probably. Okay. I hope she doesn't see it. Actually, this now she'd probably go mad with me for talking about it.
Black Paranormal. There's plenty of Muppets walking around. Brilliant, Paul.
Oi.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Debbie Shaw states, I used to see lights in my bedroom when I was very little, and I convinced myself it was Peter Pan, although I never actually saw Peter Pan. It's interesting, Debbie.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And let's have a look. It's
well, we've got this idea that it's Tinkerbell, haven't we? And the little winged, beautiful creature, but I think there's a bit more to it than that.
I'm going to shout out something that I just saw in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
I am convinced that the braces were on the girl in Moonraker. The joke doesn't work without Jaws seeing the girl with the braces. I emailed this to the host of a relatively, I believe he at one point was the owner of Fangoria magazine, but he was running a James Bond podcast at the time. And I'm like, hey, were you aware of this? And he's like, no, she's got braces. And he goes back and she doesn't have braces. So that's another hill that I will die on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's sad to think that aliens like stuff can be the most funniest of things. Just not alien there from James. Yeah. Okay, I've got one from Rick Allen. All phenomena has missing time because all phenomena has the same source, which is why all sections contain the same phenomena. Cryptids, man speak, so do aliens, and so do angels, and so do shadow people.
I'm sympathetic to it.
Okay. That's a nice one. And I'll have to put this one on the screen, Paul, because it is a question. John Batten, thanks for the monetary donation tonight. John Blatt.
Thank you.
And Joshua, share any ways how we can ward off or protect. We just had a similar question.
Yeah. I think that in addition to what I said, if you think you're under direct enchantment, so to speak, an underappreciated method of breaking the spell would be to turn an item of clothing inside out. something about that seems to separate you from their world. I guess in fairyland, which is a land of inversions, inverting an inversion sort of breaks the spell. Puts me in the mindset of, abductees who wake up with their clothing inside out or something along those lines too. But there's something about that too. So if you want to add that to the iron and the salt and the prayer, that might help too.
Are we out of questions, Les?
I've got one more, and we can have a little talk on this one. It's from Phil Stead. Joshua, when will the current disclosure circus end? How long have we got?
This might be the last disclosure season because the end of the world is coming. Like, I listen to a lot of astrologers who are very cautious on the space weather for next year. But I also think that the reason that we've had this, which, speaking objectively, is one of the more interesting disclosure seasons. I think that the reason that we've been able to have that is because we live during such an anti-structural, uncertain time. It's like trickster time right now, right?
Yeah.
So of course, we get more ground covered on the UFO question. I'm not sure it hasn't ended already, quite frankly. I think that part of me thinks that the congressional hearings in the U.S. were the peak of it, because it's kind of just sort of limping along now. And here's the thing, too. I've historically been really critical of the disclosure community until I actually started engaging with some of those people in a more honest way. And I think that their goal to a certain degree is attainable. It just wasn't the goal that I thought it would be. So I don't think we're ever going to get an authority who comes out and says, hey, yes, we have extraterrestrials coming to Earth. But I do think that the true goal of the disclosure movement, which was to get the average person on the street to say, yeah, there's something strange with these UFOs, will succeed or has succeeded. Honestly, the number of people who I talk to at like church-going people who are willing to admit this, it's very different than it was like 5 years ago. Extremely different.
It's opening up, isn't it? Yeah,
it really is. Yeah. It really is.
So, I've got a question there actually, because so we have these congressional hearings. So-called whistleblowers come to the table and present their evidence. And then previous to that, the build-up to that was all obviously these tic-tac videos from the military came out from 2017, was it? I think onwards.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think there's any more? So you've had the videos, you've had the congressional hearings. What more is there to do, do you think, Joshua?
I mean, it puts me in the mindset of whenever people get this great evidence of Bigfoot DNA, and the problem always is that you can't confirm it's Bigfoot DNA until you have a Bigfoot specimen to say yes, it matches the Bigfoot DNA, right? So you end up with like, it's an anomalous, close to humans, close to primates. We don't know, and I think that everybody wants like metamaterials or crash debris to be the smoking gun, and I don't think it's going to be, and I don't think there is a smoking gun, because I don't think that whatever this thing is necessarily wants to engage with us on a cultural level. I think it wants to engage with us on a personal level,
Yeah.
I think there's a certain amount of cultural change that it wants to see, and it realizes that the ground is best fertilized at the individual level. But as far as like a landing on the White House lawn, I don't know if that happens. I think the disclosure is going to come on the phenomenon's terms. It's just going, it's not going to be anything that we do.
Yeah. So have you got any thoughts on that, Paul?
No, because he said it, and I do agree with him. But right, quick fire question: if you could experience one part of all of this unexplained phenomena, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Do I get to specify? Do I get to specify when?
And just with whatever you want.
Because like if it's in the middle of the night and I've gone up to go to the bathroom, I don't want to see a Bigfoot looking like an inch through the window at night and going to the bathroom. I really think it would be. I do think that it would be great to see a CE 2, or something like that, or a CE 3, something that I couldn't talk myself out of. In a lot of ways, it used to be the inverse. I used to be more afraid of UFOs than I was of Bigfoot, but now I'm kind of a little bit more afraid of Bigfoot than I am UFOs. So yeah, probably a UFO, and that answer might change, in a week or two.
Yeah. Right, one more then. Who besides yourself? Because I don't think you're breaking new ground, Joshua, in this subject. Who's broken new ground within the subject of unexplained phenomena the last 10 years?
Oh my goodness, there's a great book called what's it called? Dara Mason is his name, and it's called A Song of the Dark Man. It's a book that just came out, which is absolutely fantastic. I had the great pleasure of writing the foreword to a Bigfoot book that is hands down the best Bigfoot book I have ever read. It is a transpersonal, Jungian critical look at Bigfoot culture, and it's I would compare it to a Jeffrey Kripal style look at the Bigfoot phenomenon, which has not been done, and it's fascinating. So that's forthcoming. I'll be sure to announce that. I didn't write it. I wrote a forward for a friend, but I will be sure to promote his work as soon as it comes out.
And send us the information about it when it's out there, and we'll. And would this guy be willing to talk, or is he just writer?
I believe he would. Would.
Brilliant.
A great person.
Well, Joshua, honestly, I've really enjoyed speaking with you. I know Les has. Alison's done the moderating, and I'm sure she has. Everyone in chat, from me, thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Everyone in the chat and on the screen. This has been a great way to spend the afternoon, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I've just got to say thanks for all the super chats tonight. Thanks for everybody coming into the stream, as Paul says. And we'll see you all on Sunday. Is that right, Paul? We'll be back on Sunday.
Yeah, we'll be back Sunday. Thank you very much.
On that note, then, it's good night from all of us.
Right.